Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Please stick to the video. I will show you how you can caught your cheater husband very cleverly. My name is Ava Miller. I'm 35, a graphic designer, and I live with my husband, David, in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Austin, Texas. We have a small ranch-style house on a tree-lined street not far from Zilker Park. Visitors often comment on how idyllic it is, almost too perfect. A manicured front lawn with rose bushes, pristine white window frames, a house that looks like something out of a real estate magazine. But behind the facade, it's not as perfect as it seems. David and I have been married for 16 years. We got married very young. I was 19, he was 22. Back then, I was convinced we were meant to be. He was my first serious boyfriend, my first love, my forever and always. Our wedding was a small ceremony in a local church in my hometown in rural Texas, and all our relatives were there. I remember thinking, this is what happiness feels like, and it will last forever. The forever part has held up, at least on paper. In reality, it has often been different. David works in the film industry, mostly as a production manager. He's constantly on the go, on location, long nights, receptions, meetings. It used to thrill me. His energy, his stories from the set, the glamorous names he mentioned. Over the years, however, I started to wonder more and more if that world was driving us apart. I'm much more of a homebody. As a graphic designer, I work from home a lot, often alone, immersed in layouts and campaigns for Austin-based agencies. We don't have children. At first, it was a conscious decision because we both wanted to focus on our careers. Later, when the time might have been right, it felt like the moment had passed. Sometimes I regret it, but sometimes I'm also relieved. Our marriage is a mix of closeness and distance. We still laugh, we share many habits, but something is missing. A sense of ease, an unshakable trust, the kind I once imagined we'd have. That Saturday morning, I woke up earlier than David. The sun cast bright stripes on the bedroom wall, and I lay still, listening to his quiet breathing. I wondered if he ever lay awake thinking about us. I eventually got up, put on my robe, and went to the kitchen. The smell of coffee, the hum of the machine, small rituals that grounded me. While I waited, I scrolled through my phone. A text from my best friend, Jane. "Hey, how's your movie star doing? Phone in hand again? Come to the farmer's market with me today. You need a distraction." She always called him a movie star, even though he wasn't one, only in the sense that he worked among them. Jane had often hinted that she didn't trust him. Too many pretty colleagues, too many nights away, she'd say. I'd always brushed it off, but on that morning, with a fresh cup of coffee in my hand, I felt those doubts gnawing at me again. "Morning," I finally heard David from the hallway. He came into the kitchen, groggy and in only his shorts, and grabbed his phone first thing. "Morning," I replied, trying to sound normal. "Everything okay?" he asked, staring at his screen. "Yeah, everything's fine." I sipped my coffee, watching him over the rim of the cup. "Just have to check some emails real quick," he mumbled. New York was exhausting. Everything always piles up. "Of course," I said, but inside I was thinking, always that phone, always that work. He noticed my tone and looked up. "What?" "Nothing." "Ava," he sighed, "we've been over this. I'm not doing this to ignore you. It's my job." I forced a smile. "I know. I'm just going to clean the bathroom real quick." "Cleaning again?" He laughed briefly, shaking his head. "You're crazy. Saturday morning and you want to scrub tile? Someone has to do it. Let's just have breakfast together instead." "In a minute." I started cleaning the bathroom mechanically, as always, and then I saw it. A blonde hair in our shower. Thin, light, not mine and not his. In that moment, everything I had only vaguely felt before, mistrust, uncertainty, distance, suddenly became real. A piece of evidence, small and inconspicuous, but sharp as a knife. I stared at the hair in my hand as if I had found evidence of a crime. Thin, almost translucent in the light, but definitely blonde. My breathing quickened. I have black hair. David has black hair. We live alone. I felt hot under my rubber gloves. I held the hair up, looked at it one more time, then quickly threw it in the trash can, as if I could erase it from my mind, too. But the image was seared in my brain. "Ava, David's voice from the kitchen. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I called back, too quickly, too high-pitched. A few seconds later, he was in the doorway, coffee cup in hand, hair messy, still sleepy. "You seem off." I forced myself to appear calm. "I'm fine, just doing a quick clean." He took a step closer. "You're pale. Don't you want to sit down instead?" I forced a smile. "No, it's okay. I'll be done in a minute." David studied me, then raised an eyebrow. "Okay, but please don't stress yourself out with cleaning so much. You really overdo it sometimes." "It just has to be done," I replied, wiping the shower wall, right where the blonde hair had been stuck moments ago. He placed his cup on the edge of the sink, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Babe, it's the weekend. Come on, let's have breakfast." I looked at him. There was something warm and familiar in his dark eyes, but at the same time there was that distance that had been making me so uneasy in recent months. "In a minute," I mumbled. "I'll be done in a second." At the breakfast table, the mood was strange. David cracked eggs, scrambling them in the pan as if everything was normal. I sat with my coffee cup, watching him every move, the ease with which he moved.
If there was nothing to hide. So he began as he put the pan on the table. "I thought we could go for a walk in Zilker Park today. Just the two of us. Unwind for a bit." "Sounds great," I said automatically, but my thoughts immediately drifted. Just the two of us. Or had someone else recently been here? I reached for the salt shaker but put it back down because my hands were trembling slightly. David noticed it. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, of course." He put his fork down. "You seem tense. Is something wrong?" I took a deep breath. Now or never, I thought. But how do you say something like that? "Hey, I just found a blonde hair in our shower. Can you explain that?" Instead, I asked, "Hey, did you take a shower yesterday evening after I had already gone to bed?" He blinked, looking confused. "Yeah? Why?" "No reason." I tried to sound casual. "It just occurred to me that the bathroom was so humid this morning." "Huh?" He picked up his fork again, chewing. "Yeah, it was late. I was sweaty from the drive back from New York." I nodded, staring at my scrambled eggs, but barely ate anything. After a while, I asked, "And how was New York?" "Stressful as always," he replied, shrugging his shoulders. "Long days, chaotic crew, but at least the premiere was well attended. The press was there too." "Did you see any colleagues you already knew?" I asked, trying to sound overly casual. He laughed quietly. "Colleagues? Why are you asking like that?" "Just curious." "Yeah, sure. You always run into people. The business is small." "Why?" I took a sip of coffee. My heart was pounding. "Nothing." He put his fork down, looking at me searchingly. "Ava, if something is on your mind, just say it. We've been married for 16 years. I can tell when something is bothering you." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, really." He studied me for another moment, then slowly nodded. "All right, but you know you can talk to me about anything." "Can I?" I thought. After breakfast, he cleared the plates. I stayed at the table, staring into space. The blonde hair wouldn't leave me alone. The longer I thought about it, the less I could dismiss it as a coincidence. Images formed in my head. Another woman in our shower, laughing as David hands her my shampoo. Blonde, confident, a stranger. My throat tightened. As David put the plates in the dishwasher, he said, "You look like your mind is a million miles away." I forced a calm tone. "Just have a lot on my mind. Work, Jane, all kinds of things." He nodded, accepting it. But I knew from that moment on, I would start looking more closely. The days after finding the blonde hair felt strange. It was as if the world had shifted just a tiny bit, and suddenly everything was off-kilter. On the surface, our daily routine was the same. David worked a lot, made phone calls, wrote emails, left for appointments. In the evenings, we sat together at the table, ate, and talked about small talk. But for me, every sentence, every movement, every little gesture had taken on a new meaning. I noticed that he had recently started placing his phone face down on the table. Before, it would be lying face up, and I could see when a message came in. Now, it remained hidden.
I noticed he stayed in the bathroom longer in the evenings. The water would run, the fan would hum. Sometimes I heard him humming. Before, I hadn't cared. Now, I wondered who he was showering for so wholeheartedly when I was already in my pajamas. I noticed he was shaving more often, even on days when he was supposedly just doing office work. All small things. Maybe a coincidence. Maybe not. At night, I lay awake beside him. He slept deeply, his breathing steady, sometimes a soft snore. I stared into the darkness and wondered if I was going crazy, if I was looking for something that wasn't there, or if, on the contrary, I had been looking away for far too long. 2 days later, I texted Jane, my best friend. I didn't really want to tell her anything, but it was burning a hole in my chest. "Time for coffee? I need a distraction," she replied immediately. "Always. Pike Place Market, 4 p.m. We met at the Daily Grind Cafe. It was crowded, as usual. The smell of fresh pastries hung in the air. Tourists were lining up. Jane was already sitting by the window, blonde, energetic as always. "There you are," she said as I sat down. "You look tense." I waved her off, forcing a smile. "Too much work." "Work?" She raised an eyebrow. "Or too much David?" I said, "Nothing," taking a sip of my cappuccino. "All right," she said after a while. "You don't have to tell me, but you know I can see it in your face." I stared into my cup, stirring the foam with my spoon. "It's nothing concrete, just little things." "Little things?" she repeated. I nodded. "You know, when you suddenly start noticing things you never paid attention to before, a different perfume, coming home late, a phone lying face down on the table." She said nothing, but I felt her gaze. "Maybe I'm just imagining it," I continued, my voice quieter. "Maybe I'm seeing ghosts." Jane took a sip of her coffee, slowly setting the cup down. "Ghosts are usually not ghosts," she murmured. "Sometimes it's just what's been in the room the whole time." I looked up. "You mean—" She shrugged. "I don't mean anything. I'm just saying you should look closer." We were silent. Outside, crowds of people passed by, shopping bags in their arms, laughter, a jumble of voices. I felt like I was behind a pane of glass, separated from that normalcy. "You know him," Jane said finally, her voice softer. "You can tell when someone is different, when they suddenly have secrets. You're not stupid." I nodded, but the lump in my throat only grew bigger. On the way home, I walked through the narrow streets, the sounds of the city all around me, but it was quiet inside. Her words echoed. "You can tell when someone is different." And indeed, I started to register everything. How David smelled of a different soap we had never bought, how he sometimes smiled absently when he looked at his phone, how he chose his clothes more carefully than before, even when he was just going to the office. I said nothing. I just collected every detail, every deviation. An invisible log was being compiled in my head. But the more I saw, the clearer it became. It was no longer just my imagination. Something was going on, and I had to find out what. It started with a small thing that I almost overlooked, my shampoo. I've been using the same one for years, a thick, dark liquid with an herbal scent that always gave me a sense of stability. David didn't particularly like the smell. He had his own neutral body wash, always the same one. We had this division for years, my shelf, his shelf, like two small territories that we never questioned. But one evening when I was showering, I noticed that the bottle was lighter. I shook it, and sure enough, it was at least a third emptier than it should have been. I had just bought it. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe I had underestimated the amount. Maybe I had been
wasteful. But over the next few days, I paid closer attention. I always put the bottle back in the same spot, subtly marking a line in the plastic with my fingernail. And then, after 3 days, it was clear. The shampoo was getting emptier without my help. A shiver ran down my spine. David hated that smell. He had never touched it, never even tried. Why would he suddenly use mine? It was a foreign pattern. Someone else had to have been here. I stood in the bathroom one morning, the bottle in my hand, staring at the contents that were dwindling far too quickly. The light of the fluorescent lamp reflected on the plastic. My heart pounded in my temples. She was here, whoever she is. She stood here in my shower, washed her hair while I was perhaps sitting in the living room or lying in bed. She used my shampoo. The thought squeezed my throat. It was no longer just a loose blonde hair that could still be explained away. This was more intimate, more direct. Someone had taken my place, touched my things, taken on my scent. I felt displaced in my own home. During the day, I tried not to let anything show. David worked as always, made calls, laughed at some joke on the other end of the line. But I saw him differently now. Every time he walked past me, I smelled him, trying to catch a hint of my shampoo. But there was nothing. He wasn't using it. So who was? In the evening, I saw Jane again. Not planned this time, but because she called me. "Feel left a glass of wine? I'm in town." I agreed simply because I couldn't bear to carry it all by myself anymore. We sat in a small bar on Division Street with dim lighting, candles on the tables, and the conversations of other guests as a soft background hum. I told her about the shampoo cautiously, almost shamefully, as if it were a ridiculous detail. She listened, arms crossed, her expression serious. "So," she said after a while, "either he's using it secretly or someone else used it." "Exactly," I mumbled. "And you don't think it was him?" I shook my head. "He can't stand the smell. He never touched it. Never." She took a sip of wine, slowly set the glass down. "Then you know what that means." I was silent. There was a storm raging inside me, but I couldn't put it into words. "Ava," Jane said, her voice softer, "you're not looking for signs anymore. You've already found them." Her words echoed as I held the glass in my hands. I wanted to disagree, wanted to say that it could all have a harmless explanation, but I couldn't find one. Later, alone in bed, I stared into the darkness. David lay next to me, sleeping deeply and steadily. I heard his breathing, felt the warmth of his shoulder, and yet I felt more alone than ever before. The shampoo, the hair, the late nights, the evidence was forming a pattern, and for the first time a decision formed inside me, dark and silent. If I couldn't get the truth the easy way, I would get it myself. The thought wouldn't let me go. Day after day, I saw the shampoo bottle getting emptier, an invisible piece of evidence that no one but me could notice. I felt like a detective in my own home, and at the same time like a lunatic. At night, I lay awake turning over the possibilities. I could confront David directly. I could ask him openly, straightforwardly. But what if he brushed it off? What if he made me out to be paranoid? Then I would be left alone with my uncertainty, with no proof. I needed clarity, and I needed it in a way that he couldn't deny. The idea came to me suddenly, almost like a joke. What if someone else is using my shampoo, and I tamper with it so that it can't go unnoticed? I laughed quietly to myself, then shaking my head at myself. But the thought remained. It gnawed at me, and finally it was no longer a joke, but a plan. The next morning, I went to the drugstore on Congress Avenue. It was a normal gray weekday. The shelves were full, women with baskets, men standing perplexed in front of razors. I pushed my shopping cart as usual, grabbing cleaning supplies, toothpaste, a new pack of cotton pads, and then I stopped in front of the shelf with hair removal cream. I hesitated, feeling myself get hot. What was I doing? I looked around, almost as if my guilt was written all over my face. No one was paying attention to me. A woman was looking for shampoo for dry hair. A man was putting 2 bottles of body wash in his basket. I reached for a tube of hair removal cream, shoving it between laundry detergent and paper towels. My heart was racing, as if I had stolen something forbidden. At home, I waited until David disappeared into his office. Then I went into the bathroom, closed the door behind me, and placed the shampoo bottle on the sink. I took the tube of hair removal cream out of the bag, carefully opened the cap, The smell was sharp, chemical, completely different from the familiar herbal scent of my shampoo. With trembling hands, I poured the liquid into the shampoo bottle, carefully, slowly, so nothing spilled. I mixed it, shook it, until the consistency looked somewhat the same. Then I put the bottle back in its place. I washed my hands, wiped the sink, as if every trace would be a giveaway. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure David could hear it outside. When I was done, I leaned against the cold tiles and took a deep breath. Later, at dinner, I looked at him as he ate, as he casually talked about the new shoot. I nodded, asked questions, laughed at the right moments. No one would have guessed that I had just done something that transformed me into a different woman, no longer the understanding wife, but a woman on a quest for the truth. But inside, there was a storm. What if I had gone too far? What if it's true and she comes back? What if I suddenly get a certainty that I can't get rid of? That night, I lay awake while David slept beside me. I stared at the ceiling and waited for what was about to happen. It was as if I had set a trap, and now I was standing next to it, motionless, waiting for someone to step into it. The shampoo bottle stood in its place, outwardly unremarkable as always, but I knew what was lurking inside, and that knowledge followed me with every trip to the bathroom, with every glance at the shower, with every sound that came from the hallway. The first 2 days, nothing happened, or rather, nothing that I noticed. I checked the bottle almost compulsively, lifting it, turning it, carefully shaking it. The contents seemed unchanged. Maybe no one had used it. Maybe it was over. But my heart beat faster every time David went to shower. I would stand in the kitchen then, listening to the water, imagining him unscrewing the cap, massaging the foam into his hair. And at the same time, I knew he hated the smell. It wasn't his shampoo. So I waited. Not for him, for her. During those days, my daily life was like a shadow play. I worked on my graphic projects, clicked through emails, edited layouts, but everything happened mechanically, without concentration. In truth, my mind was only in the bathroom. In the evenings, I sat with David on the sofa. We watched a TV show. He laughed at the right moments, made me popcorn, his arm around me, and I thought, maybe it really is just my imagination. Maybe she doesn't exist. Maybe I'm the one who's losing herself here. But then he would go to his office, and I would take the opportunity to check the bathroom. The same scene over and over. Me alone, the bottle in my hand, checking if it had gotten lighter. And then, on the 4th day, it happened. It was afternoon. David was supposedly at the office. I went into the bathroom, almost casually, and stopped. The bottle was clearly lighter. I lifted it up, feeling the difference. My fingernail mark, which I had set as a reference point, confirmed it. At least 2 finger widths were missing. My stomach clenched. Someone had used it. Someone had been here. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, staring at the bottle in my hand. The air was stuffy. I felt dizzy. This was no longer a vague feeling, no longer a hair that could be dismissed as a coincidence. This was concrete. She had been here, in my bathroom, under my water, with my shampoo, and now with hair removal cream on her head. I felt sick with excitement. That night, I could barely sleep. I lay awake, listening to every sound. David breathed calmly next to me, turning once in his sleep. I stared into the darkness and imagined scenes. A foreign woman leaving the shower with a desperate scream, handfuls of hair in her hands. I was startled by myself. What was I doing here? What if I had gone too far? And yet, a part of me felt stronger, more determined, as if I had regained control. I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. It started with a coincidence, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was fate that decided to lift the veil. It was a Thursday evening. I had the TV on in the background while I worked on my laptop. David was once again not at home, supposedly for a long production meeting. I had long since gotten used to the fact that he was away more often than he was here. The news was on, and I was barely listening, until a name suddenly came up that made me prick up my ears. Miriam Davies.
Actress, blonde, flawless, one of those faces everyone knew in America. I looked up and froze. She was on the screen, accompanied by camera flashes, in front of a premiere movie theater in Los Angeles. But she didn't look like she normally did. Her head was bald, smoothly shaven. No hair, no hint of it, nothing. Just a gleaming, pale scalp under the glare of the spotlights. The reporters were going crazy, talking about a mysterious incident, a scandal behind the scenes. Miriam Davies seemed flustered, wore a scarf that kept slipping and dodged every question. My breath caught. My fingers froze on the keyboard. A thought flashed through my mind so clear that it scared me. The shampoo. I couldn't look away. There she was, this woman, suddenly without hair. And in that moment, I knew without a doubt, without any escape, she was the one. She had been in my bathroom. She had used my shampoo. The next few days were a blur of news, tabloids, and headlines. Miriam Davies with a bald head. Coincidence or scandal? What's behind the actress's sudden hair loss? Photos everywhere. Miriam with a wig, Miriam with a headscarf, Miriam warding off the cameras. I flipped through the newspapers, stared at the pictures, and felt a mix of triumph, disgust, and fear. The truth was right in front of me. All of America could see it. Only David said nothing. He came home late, seemed flustered, avoiding my gaze. His answers were shorter than usual. He talked quickly about work, as if to fill a void with words. I watched him silently. There was an expression on his face that I knew, the struggle between guilt and concealment. And then, one evening, we were at dinner when he suddenly stopped. His cutlery lay still on the plate, and he looked at me long and searchingly. "Ava," he began. Then he broke off. I met his gaze. "What?" I asked, calmly, almost coldly. "Nothing," he mumbled and lowered his head. But I knew. He suspected that I knew. The next morning, there was a newspaper in the mailbox with a photo of Miriam Davies on the front page. The article speculated whether her sudden hair loss had health-related reasons or if there was a malicious prank behind it. I took the newspaper, placed it pointedly on the kitchen table, right between our coffee cups. David came in, saw it, and his hand froze in midair. "Don't you know her too?" I asked in an innocent tone. He looked at the photo, then at me. For a moment, his face was a mask, motionless, empty. Then he said, only vaguely, "From the set. She's complicated." "I see," I nodded, took a sip of coffee, and let the silence between us grow until it became oppressively heavy. Two voices were fighting inside me. One said, "You did it. You brought the truth to light." The other whispered, "What if you went too far? What if this scandal becomes bigger than you can bear?" But even stronger than the doubts was the certainty. My marriage, as it was, no longer existed. It was as if a storm was sweeping over the city, a storm of headlines, photos, and rumors. Within a few days, Miriam Davies was on everyone's lips. The newspapers were in a frenzy. Miriam Davies with a bald head. Coincidence or scandal? What's behind the actress's sudden hair loss? Photos everywhere. Miriam with a wig, Miriam with a headscarf, Miriam warding off the cameras. I flipped through the newspapers, stared at the pictures, and felt a mix of triumph, disgust, and fear. The truth was right in front of me. All of America could see it. Only David said nothing. He came home late, seemed flustered, avoiding my gaze. His answers were shorter than usual. He talked quickly about work, as if to fill a void with words. I watched him silently. There was an expression on his face that I knew, the struggle between guilt and concealment. And then, one evening, we were at dinner when he suddenly stopped. His cutlery lay still on the plate, and he looked at me long and searchingly. "Ava," he began. Then he broke off. I met his gaze. "What?" I asked, calmly, almost coldly. "Nothing," he mumbled and lowered his head. But I knew. He suspected that I knew. The next morning, there was a newspaper in the mailbox with a photo of Miriam Davies on the front page. The article speculated whether her sudden hair loss had health-related reasons or if there was a malicious prank behind it. I took the newspaper, placed it pointedly on the kitchen table, right between our coffee cups. David came in, saw it, and his hand froze in midair. "Don't you know her too?" I asked in an innocent tone. He looked at the photo, then at me. For a moment, his face was a mask, motionless, empty. Then he said, only vaguely, from the set, she's complicated." "I see," I nodded, took a sip of coffee, and let the silence between us grow until it became oppressively heavy. Two voices were fighting inside me. One said, "You did it. You brought the truth to light." The other whispered, "What if you went too far? What if this scandal becomes bigger than you can bear?" But even stronger than the doubts was the certainty. My marriage, as it was, no longer existed. It was as if a storm was sweeping over the city, a storm of headlines, photos, and rumors. Within a few days, Miriam Davies was on everyone's lips. The newspapers were in a frenzy. Miriam Davies with a bald head. Coincidence or scandal? What's behind the actress's sudden hair loss? Photos everywhere. Miriam with a wig, Miriam with a headscarf, Miriam warding off the cameras. I flipped through the newspapers, stared at the pictures, and felt a mix of triumph, disgust, and fear. The truth was right in front of me. All of America could see it. Only David said nothing. He came home late, seemed flustered, avoiding my gaze. His answers were shorter than usual. He talked quickly about work, as if to fill a void with words. I watched him silently. There was an expression on his face that I knew, the struggle between guilt and concealment. And then, one evening, we were at dinner when he suddenly stopped. His cutlery lay still on the plate, and he looked at me long and searchingly. "Ava," he began. Then he broke off. I met his gaze. "What?" I asked, calmly, almost coldly. "Nothing," he mumbled and lowered his head. But I knew. He suspected that I knew. The next morning, there was a newspaper in the mailbox with a photo of Miriam Davies on the front page. The article speculated whether her sudden hair loss had health-related reasons or if there was a malicious prank behind it. I took the newspaper, placed it pointedly on the kitchen table, right between our coffee cups. David came in, saw it, and his hand froze in midair. "Don't you know her too?" I asked in an innocent tone. He looked at the photo, then at me. For a moment, his face was a mask, motionless, empty. Then he said, only vaguely, from the set, she's complicated." "I see," I nodded, took a sip of coffee, and let the silence between us grow until it became oppressively heavy. Two voices were fighting inside me. One said, "You did it. You brought the truth to light." The other whispered, "What if you went too far? What if this scandal becomes bigger than you can bear?" But even stronger than the doubts was the certainty. My marriage, as it was, no longer existed. It was as if a storm was sweeping over the city, a storm of headlines, photos, and rumors. Within a few days, Miriam Davies was on every
Mailbox. Miriam was on the front page again. This time, it was the New York Times, not some tabloid. Hollywood star loses hair. Film industry speculates about a set scandal. I stood in the kitchen, placed the newspaper right in the middle of the table, and waited. David came in, poured himself coffee, and his gaze immediately fell on the front page. A barely noticeable twitch crossed his face, and he grabbed the cup as if it had suddenly become essential for survival. I watched him silently, my hands wrapped around my coffee cup. Say something, I thought. Admit it or lie, but do something. But he did nothing. He remained silent, and in that silence, a resolve grew inside me. If he wouldn't talk, then I would, and not just privately. I would make the truth public. Just as he had ignored me for years, I would now make sure all of America saw what was really behind his work. It was as if I had been holding my breath for days, since the hair, since the shampoo, since the headlines about Miriam Davies. I had been silent. I had watched David pretend that everything was normal, as if 16 years of marriage could just be covered up with silence.
But inside, something had risen up in me, bigger than fear, stronger than shame, the will to hear the truth. That Tuesday evening, I couldn't take it anymore. David was sitting in the living room in his favorite armchair, a glass of red wine beside him. The lamp cast a warm light that made him look almost peaceful. A script was lying open on the coffee table, but I knew he wasn't reading it. His fingers were flipping pages, but his eyes were empty. I stood in the doorway, heard my heart pounding, and said, "We need to talk." He looked up, surprised, almost annoyed. "Ava, please, not now. I'm tired." "No." My voice trembled, but I stood firm. "Right now." Slowly, he put the script aside. "What's wrong?" I stepped inside, sat down across from him, and felt my hands become clammy. I clenched them into fists so he wouldn't see the trembling. "For weeks," I began, "something has been wrong between us. You're different, distant, secretive." I took a deep breath. "And then I find blonde hair in our shower, hair that isn't ours." He blinked. His face froze. Not a word, just a brief twitching muscle in his jaw. "Ava," he spoke softly as if to soothe me, "it's not what you think." I laughed dryly. "Not what I think, David. I'm not blind. I saw my shampoo getting emptier and emptier. I know someone else was here, in my bathroom, in my shower." I grabbed the newspaper from the table, which I had placed there on purpose, and pushed it toward him. On the front page, Miriam Davies with a headscarf. The headline, "Star Loses Hair, Sabotage or Illness." He stared at the picture, then at me. "Say it," I demanded, my voice now cuttingly clear. "Say it to my face. Be honest just once." He lowered his head, running both hands over his face. For a moment, only his breathing could be heard. Then he looked up, and in his eyes there was something I hadn't seen in years. Fear. "It happened," he whispered. I felt a chill. I felt my hands trembling, my throat tightening. It happened? So simple, so easily said, as if it had been a mistake, a little trip. "How long?" I asked, my voice strained. He was silent. "How long?" I slammed my fist on the table. The glass rattled. He looked at me almost pleadingly, then lowered his eyes. "A few months? A few months?" I laughed bitterly. "A few months where she stood in my bathroom, used my shampoo, washed her hair in my shower, while I was probably sitting in the living room in my house." Tears burned in my eyes, but I held his gaze. "And you said nothing. You looked at me as if everything was fine. You lied to me day after day." He stood up, wanting to come to me, but I pulled back. "Ava, please, it was a mistake, a damned mistake. I didn't want this. I love you." "Love," my voice cracked. "You dare to even say that word? Love is trust. Love is respect. Love means I shouldn't have to feel like a stranger in my own home." He reached out his hand to me, but I tore myself away. 16 years, David. I believed in you. I trusted you. I spent my youth with you, my dreams, my hope. And for what? So you could replace me with some actress because she's blonde and glamorous? He swallowed, his eyes glistening. It wasn't planned. It just happened." "Just happened?" I felt the tears running down my face. "It just happened that you lied to me. It just happened that you crushed my heart. It just happened that you turned our marriage into a play." A fight followed that lasted for hours. I screamed. He was silent. Then he screamed, and I was silent. We threw things at each other that we could never take back. I heard myself say words I never thought possible. "You're a stranger to me. I despise you. 16 years for nothing." And in between, moments when we both cried, when we looked at each other and recognized what had once been in the other's eyes. But it was only a shadow, an echo, and an echo is not enough to save a marriage. The next day, I went to a law firm, a plain office downtown. Gray carpet, white walls, file folders on the shelves. The lawyer listened to me calmly as I spoke. It was hard for me to say the words, and yet it felt good. "We will file for divorce," she said matter-of-factly, "and if you want, we can have the press on your side." I nodded, wiping my eyes. Yes, I want that. On the way home in the crowded subway, I cried silently, not loudly, not visibly, just quiet tears that ran down my cheeks. No one noticed, and maybe that was fitting, because our marriage, our story, hadn't been noticed by anyone either, except me. But as the city rushed around me, I felt something else, a new clarity. It was over, and sometimes an ending also means a new beginning. The morning I pulled the newspaper out of the mailbox, I felt as if I were holding a bomb. The headline jumped out at me. Affair, scandal, baldness, the secret truth behind Miriam's hair loss. Below it, my name in black and white. Ava Miller, wife of production manager David Miller, speaks out. My fingers trembled as I turned the pages. There it was, my story, my words. I've been silent for too long. You can't end 16 years of marriage with a lie. I want the truth to come out. I stared at the lines that had come from my mouth and felt a pang in my chest. On one hand, a triumph. The truth was no longer just my dark secret. On the other, shame, because the whole city could now read about it. 2 days earlier, I was sitting at a cafe on South Congress when Mark Stevens stood in front of me. He was taller than I had imagined, slender, with a dark coat and a gaze that immediately resonated with me. Not a curious, greedy one, as you would expect from a reporter, but serious, respectful, as if he wanted to reassure me. I hear you, all of you. Miss Miller. He extended his hand, his handshake firm, warm. Thank you for coming. I nodded, unsure, my hands clammy. My heart was racing. I had never confided such intimate things to a stranger before. We sat down at a small table in the corner. The cafe was full, a jumble of voices, the scent of pastries. I felt like I was in a bubble, separated from all the others.
You know, I've been writing about celebrities, scandals, and affairs for 15 years, Mark began, his notepad in front of him. But I don't want to exploit your story. I want it to be told in your words. Something in me relaxed at his words. I nodded, took a deep breath, and started talking. I told him about that Saturday morning, about the blonde hair in the shower, about how I had wanted to suppress it at first, but how it had gnawed at me. I spoke of the nights I lay awake while David breathed calmly beside me, not knowing if I was paranoid or finally waking up. I told him about the shampoo that got emptier and emptier, about my secret mark on the bottle, about the decision to put the hair removal cream in it. As I spoke, Mark looked at me calm, focused, with a seriousness that sometimes made me stop short. He took notes, but never frantically. He didn't interrupt. He just quietly asked for more detail if he needed to understand something more precisely. And then I said, finally, my voice breaking, I was sitting in front of the TV, and there she was, Miriam Davies, without hair. All of America was talking about it, and I knew she had stood in my shower. Tears ran down my face. I hadn't planned on crying, but it broke out of me. Mark silently handed me a napkin. Not a face of pity, no feigned regret, just quiet presence. Thank you for trusting me with this, he said after a long pause. But you need to know, if we publish this, there's no going back. It's going to cause a stir. You'll face attacks, doubts, mockery, but also respect. Are you ready? I wiped away my tears. Yes, I whispered. I am ready. I've been silent for too long. And now, 2 days later, I was sitting in my kitchen, the newspaper in my hand, my coffee untouched. I read the lines over and over. My name, my words, the public. A part of me rejoiced. I was no longer the silent wife in the background. I finally had a voice. Another part of me tensed up. Now everyone knew what had happened. My neighbors, the barista, maybe even people I hadn't seen since high school. When I went to the coffee shop shortly after, I felt like people looked at me longer. Maybe I was imagining it, maybe not. The barista smiled friendly, but her eyes darted over my face longer than usual. 2 men whispered as I walked by. I pulled my scarf tighter around me, wishing I could be invisible.
And at the same time, no, that's exactly what I didn't want anymore. I wanted to be seen, to be heard. That evening, my phone rang. It was Mark. I hesitated, then finally picked up. "Ms. Miller?" His voice was calm, warm. "I wanted to thank you. The article is out, and it's being widely discussed. But you know what? Many readers are writing that they see themselves in your story, that they want to be brave enough to stop being silent." Tears welled up in my eyes. "Are you serious?" "Yes," he said. "I often write about scandals that are empty, that are just for headlines. But your story, that's real. It has meaning." I held the phone to my ear, silent, and felt a pull in my chest. For the first time in weeks, I didn't just feel anger or pain, but also something else, a kind of warmth, a feeling of being understood in those words. "Thank you," I finally whispered. "No," he replied. "Thank you." That night, I fell asleep with the newspaper on my nightstand. My name was plastered on the front page, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't just feel loss, but also the inkling that my life could begin anew. And maybe, just maybe, that new beginning had already started with one phone call. The weeks after the publication were a whirlwind. The divorce papers had been filed, my name was in newspapers, and the neighbors looked at me with a mix of curiosity and pity. I moved through two worlds, the old, broken marriage and the new one, which didn't yet have solid ground. In the midst of it all, Mark reached out, not as a reporter, but as a person. "Ms. Miller," he wrote in a message, "I know you have a lot on your plate right now, but if you ever want to get coffee without a notepad or notes, let me know." I stared at those lines for a long time. A part of me wanted to text yes immediately. The other whispered, "You are wounded, vulnerable. Don't let anyone get so close." But eventually, I replied, "I'd love that." We met again at a small cafe in the West End. It was a gray afternoon. A drizzle hung in the air. Mark was already sitting by the window with a newspaper beside him, this time not in his work persona, but simply in a wool sweater. "Ava," he greeted me, and it was the first time he had said my first name without a title. It sounded easy, warm. We talked for a long time, first about mundane things, Austin, the winter, the best cappuccino in town, then about difficult things. "It's strange," I said at one point. "When you read your life in a newspaper, it suddenly belongs to everyone and to yourself the least." He nodded. "And at the same time, it frees you because you no longer have to hide anything." I fell silent, watching the raindrops run down the window. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll never be able to trust again." "Maybe," he replied, "it's not about trusting again immediately, but about finding someone who is patient, who waits until you are ready." His words hit me deeper than I had expected. We met again, a walk through Zilker Park where we laughed when a dog suddenly jumped into the river, an evening at the movies where we sat silently next to each other, our hands almost touching, but not quite. It was nothing official, nothing tangible. But it was a feeling, a whisper that there could be something more if I found the courage. One evening, alone at home, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. I saw my own face, my dark hair, my eyes that had cried so much, and I said quietly to myself, "I am no longer the woman who just waited. I am no longer the one who stays silent. I am more." And I believed it for the first time. The divorce wasn't final yet. My heart was still full of scars, but I felt this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new life. Sometimes you need a break to find yourself again. Sometimes something has to break to make room for something new. And sometimes it's not the years you thought you lost, but the strength you gain from them. I didn't know where my path with Mark would lead. Maybe just to a friendship, maybe to something bigger. But I knew I had learned that you can't stay silent when the truth is screaming inside you, because silence destroys, but truth sets you free. Several months had now passed since my world had fallen apart. The winter was behind me, and with the spring something returned that I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The days became brighter.
The pecan trees in Austin were in bloom, and I noticed that new life was awakening in me, too. The divorce was now final, a matter-of-fact letter from the court, a pile of paper that sealed and ended 16 years of marriage. I had cried, yes, but it was no longer a breakdown. It was more a quiet letting go. David had disappeared from my life like a shadow. Sometimes I still saw his name in articles, film projects, premieres, the same world that had once connected us. But he no longer belonged to me. I didn't know if he was still seeing Miriam, and for the first time, I truly didn't care. I rarely heard anything about Miriam anymore. She had retreated, they said. When I saw her picture in magazines, I felt nothing anymore. No triumph, no anger, just a neutral shrug. And me, I had learned that you are stronger than you think, that even after deep breaks, you keep going, sometimes slowly, sometimes more cautiously, but always forward. In those months, I had seen Mark more often, first by chance, then on purpose. Walks in Zilker Park, coffee in small Austin cafes, a movie night where we barely paid attention to the screen. We were building something that was delicate, unnamed, not rushed. Sometimes I wondered where it could lead, but the beautiful thing was, I didn't have to know. For the first time in years, I was living in the now, not in a construct of future plans and expectations. One evening, when the air was warm and the birds were singing, I sat on my balcony, a blanket around my shoulders, a glass of wine in my hand. I looked out over the rooftops of Austin, where the sun was setting, painting the sky in pink and gold, and I thought of everything that lay behind me, of the young woman who had said yes with so much hope at 19, of the nights I had doubted myself, of the moment I decided not to be silent anymore. I smiled, and I said softly to myself, it wasn't for nothing, not a single day.